It is now day 6 of the war between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel in the U.S., and Israel says the campaign is far from over. The Israeli military now says it's preparing for at least another 1 to 2 weeks of operations as the Air Force continues a massive bombing campaign across Iranian territory. According to the IDF, Israeli fighter jets have already dropped more than 5,000 bombs since the start of the war, targeting missile launchers, air defense systems, and key regime sites, including a massive military complex in Tehran. And officials say that thousands of Iranian troops have been killed in these strikes. Now, Iran has continued firing ballistic missiles and drones at Israel and the region in response, sending millions running to bomb shelters in central Israel for the 6th time today alone. The last time was just an hour and a half ago. Israeli Health Ministry says that in the past 24 hours, almost 200 injured people have been taken to hospitals, and a total of over 1,400 people have been hospitalized since the start of the fighting. Now, while the rate of Iranian strikes have dropped significantly since the start of the war, the IDF does believe that those attacks may soon stabilize, but missile fire is not expected to stop entirely, and that, in fact, it's Iran's proxy group, Hezbollah, out of Lebanon, that's likely going to be increasing its attacks on northern Israel. There have been 13 Iranian missile impacts in Israel so far, but amid the decrease in attacks, the Home Front Command has eased its guidelines. Gatherings of up to 50 people are now permitted. Workplaces can operate under the same conditions. And joining us now is our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Obviously, we saw a really, really interesting vote today in Congress. What can you tell us about that?
The vote in the Senate along party lines, just as we expected yesterday, as you and I talked about this, the real test with this war powers resolution was going to be how many Republicans would actually break away and voice criticism, concern, anger, what have you, at the way that this has been presented to the public, the way it's been presented to Congress by the Trump administration. And all we wound up seeing was one Republican vote to pull the war powers away from President Trump on this particular matter when it comes to Iran. And that was Republican Senator Rand Paul, who's generally more critical of the powers that be than the general Republican orthodoxy is. So he voted against giving President Trump the power to go to war against Iran and all the military might that goes with it. Meanwhile, one Democrat, John Fetterman, who generally goes against Democratic orthodoxy, he flipped to the Republican side. So in the end, 53 to 47 was the final tally, and essentially what was expected. Now, the question now becomes, the longer the war drags along, how many more Republicans might come out against the campaign. But for the time being, everybody except for Rand Paul holding the line. There'll be a similar vote coming up in the House, and expect kind of a similar result, maybe some flipping here and there. But I think in the early days of this war, Trump will retain that Republican support and will have to deal with the Democratic criticism.
Right. Just quick update here. There are drone sirens in northern Israel right now. Now, just turning back to the United States, what does this vote ultimately tell us about how much support President Trump has in Congress for this war? Obviously, you spoke about this in terms of timing, how long this is going to drag on. We heard Trump saying that this could be 4 to 5 weeks. Has he changed that analysis by any means?
No, we haven't gotten that indication that it'll be shorter, though we hear the president and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and others in the military tout how efficient the operation has been so far and the successes of the operation. But thus far, that has not translated, at least publicly, into some declaration that the timeline will be shorter. And that's probably best right now, because when you start to play with those timelines, you set expectations. And if expectations aren't met, then you get headlines about how the war is dragging on longer than expected. Right. You get all those other questions. So it's only smart messaging from the administration right now that they wouldn't be looking to shorten that timeline, at least publicly.
All right. That is our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, joining us from the States. We're going to turn now to what is happening within Iran. Because of a continued internet blackout, it is hard to confirm any of the reports that we are seeing. But human rights groups claim that since Saturday, more than 1,100 civilians have been killed, with residents of Tehran fleeing to the countryside or hunkering down at home, terrified by constant bombardment. Amid the chaos, Iran's top clerics are scrambling to choose a successor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the U.S.-Israel strikes. But Israel has continued to warn that any new leader would be an unequivocal target for elimination. And joining us now is Jonathan Sayeh. He's a research analyst focused on Iran at the FDD, and he's in D.C. right now. You know, obviously, these reports coming out of over 1,100 civilian deaths in Iran since Saturday. There's a continuing internet blackout. It's hard to actually verify any of these numbers. But, you know, what are you hearing from those who you are in contact with on the ground about what the reality is like in Iran right now?
The most notable report coming from inside Iran is citizens and contacts reaching out with videos demonstrating how regime forces are using civilian infrastructure as a shield. So we saw the repression apparatus embedding itself in specifically schools throughout the country. We know the IRGC has been using hospitals to hold the meeting, and it's not some covert operation. Their spokesperson officially held a press conference inside a school because he knows he's going to be a target. Of course, like father, like son, similar with Hamas, we're seeing the same strategy be deployed. And if you look at the targeted nature of Israeli attacks, sometimes it goes beyond just the specific building, and it actually takes out one particular floor of a building. So this is the precision we're dealing with. To the average Iranian, they see this as a point of no return. Of course, this was the help that was promised to them that is on the way. And the mindset is increasingly revolutionary. And as for the 1,100, it's still not verified how many of them are one of these part of the Basij militia. The idea that they're civilians has not by any means been confirmed. Of course, war is going to have catastrophic consequences, but so far we cannot verify anything that is being reported by the Islamic Republic or other outlets.
Interesting. You know, Iran's top clerics are reportedly scrambling to select a new supreme leader after Khamenei's death. You know, what does that process even look like right now? Obviously, we're seeing a lot of Iranians say that even if somebody were to be selected at this point, it wouldn't be legitimate. And what are the potential implications of choosing a new successor at this point for the stability of Iran?
The most interesting thing comes as they're entertaining whether they should select Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, as supreme leader. He is the one that has the IRGC's blessing. He's the one that knows how to operate behind the scenes. He knows the politics, even though he's not experienced and has never exercised that. But that said, that would pose a major legitimacy challenge because the Islamic Republic overthrew a monarchy claiming that power should not be hereditary. But now we're seeing that form of succession, which is why many clerics are concerned. But that said, as to how it would implicate the domestic politics, so the armed forces, primarily the IRGC, have been using the clerical and religious backing to justify and legitimize their rule. Without that, the Islamic Republic would simply look like a military dictatorship. We all knew that's what it was behind the scenes, but now they'd be exposing that cover. And of course, I can't imagine any Ayatollah right now would be volunteering for the position, given the nature of the attacks.
Right. Now, I want to talk, obviously, about these reports. We've been seeing that Iranian Kurdish militias are set to launch attacks against the IRGC right now. And this is in coordination with the United States as well as a means of trying to get ordinary Iranians to stand up and fight against the regime. Obviously, you know, we're seeing kind of mixed responses to this from the Iranian diaspora. On one hand, people are saying they want anything to be done possible to essentially remove this regime, and they don't believe that military power from the United States and Israel could do that by itself. On the other hand, there are concerns about the separatist fallout that could come as a result of the Kurds getting involved. What do you know about this?
You're right to point out that the messaging would be further complicated if the United States or Israel were to leverage separatist movements. Of course, the messaging for so long has been this is a campaign to liberate the Iranian nation from tyranny. The signals coming from Israel talking about Persia's glorious past would directly contradict any means of pursuing ethnocentric policies in the Middle East. That's on one hand. But when it comes to the operational side of things, you're talking about a few thousand fighters versus about 10,000, if not 100,000 IRGC ground forces in the Basij. In addition to that, these groups are deeply fragmented. So you're not even talking about one Kurdish entity. Within the Iranian Kurdish groups themselves, there's at least 5 factions, and even within them, there's splintered between different groups. One of them, actually, Pejok, being designated by the Treasury because of his ties to an FDO, PKK. So any unified command would have made this look more promising that we have not seen so far. And again, it's one is messaging, and the other side is the capability of these groups, whether they would have the potential to pose a meaningful threat against the Islamic Republic.
Right. Well, obviously very fascinating. Jonathan, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us with your input. We are going to be turning now to the north of Israel. Israel's northern border is heating up. The IDF says the pace of Hezbollah rocket and drone attacks from Lebanon has jumped sharply in recent days, even as the number of Iranian ballistic missiles being fired at Israel has actually dropped since the opening days of the conflict. Now, residents across northern Israel have spent much of the night in bomb shelters and safe rooms as waves of rockets and drones have been launched toward Israeli communities. We saw just a couple of minutes ago even more drone alerts in northern Israel. And Israeli forces have moved quickly to seize territory in southern Lebanon, cutting off many of Hezbollah's short-range rocket launch areas south of the Litani River. Hezbollah has started firing missiles and drones into Israel for the first time in more than a year on Monday, following the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, which has prompted Israel to respond with strikes on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, in Beirut's southern suburbs, which is the Hezbollah stronghold, and also in southern Lebanon. And according to Lebanon's health ministry, over 100 people have now been killed and more than 500 wounded since the fighting resumed. Again, it's not clear how many of those casualties are civilians. Joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent, Balir Sladin. Balir, we just saw alerts going off in northern Israel. What can you tell us about that? What has been the latest impact that you've seen?
Yes, a drone attack again at the Upper Galilee. Sirens went off in a number of Israeli communities on the border, and we've seen that happening throughout the day. From what we understand until now, there hasn't been any casualties or any harm caused to any Israeli on that front, but one drone apparently fell in an agricultural area and caused some damage there, but nothing else. This is, of course, part of Hezbollah's strategy to fire more and more drones, which make it, of course, more challenging for the Israeli air defense system to intercept them. And that's also parallel to the rockets that they fire. So far, we haven't seen what we have seen yesterday, for example, sirens in Haifa and the areas, the cities that are in the north, and also not here in the center, where yesterday they have apparently coordinated their attack with the Iranians. This didn't happen so far today, but of course, Hezbollah is also fighting on the ground. Reuters report just published an exclusive about the Radwan unit, the elite unit for Hezbollah, moving back to the south of Lebanon, meaning all the efforts that the Lebanese armed forces have done to clear that area from Hezbollah's operatives. This is meaningless, of course, because they can anytime pass the armed forces and go back to the south, and that's exactly what is happening right now. We're seeing confrontations with the IDF soldiers. Just today, 2 Israeli soldiers were moderately wounded as a result of this confrontation. But something else, I would say, even historic, is happening in Lebanon on the political level today. The president of Lebanon has declared, first of all, the Iranians cannot come to Lebanon visa-free, meaning that they need a visa in order to come to Lebanon. That's first. And the second one, which is more dramatic, that the Lebanese authorities are now banning IRGC operatives, meaning that they can actually now arrest and jail, apparently, those operatives that belong to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Meaning that we can actually see some confrontation happening between the Lebanese armed forces and Iranian forces, and apparently Hezbollah forces as well in that front, and the banning, of course, of the operatives to go down to the south of Lebanon might also create more confrontation with the armed forces in Lebanon.
All right. I'd like to thank you, Balira, for joining us from the northern border between Israel and Lebanon. Obviously, very interesting to see the Lebanese government saying that they're going to be banning IRGC activity, also banning Hezbollah from having arms. We'll obviously have to wait and see if that can actually be enforced. But let's turn back to the situation on the ground in Iran. The war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran could now be about to open a brand new front, and this time on the ground. Iran says it's carried out missile strikes targeting Kurdish opposition groups based across the border in northern Iraq, accusing them of preparing to launch attacks into Iranian territory. Now, Tehran claims that it hit the headquarters of what it calls separatist groups, warning that it won't tolerate Kurdish fighters trying to exploit the chaos of the war. But Kurdish officials say that some of their forces are already moving toward the border and could be preparing to fight Iran's security forces. Now, several Iranian Kurdish factions, including fighters from the Kurdistan Freedom Party and the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, are believed to have thousands of experienced fighters, many of whom previously battled ISIS. And reports also suggest that U.S. officials have been in contact with these Kurdish groups about potential operations, although Washington insists its war objectives are not centered on arming local militias. But joining us now is Intifad Kanbar. He's the chairman of the Kurdish Protection Action Council in Washington, D.C., and a former spokesperson and deputy prime minister of Iraq. You know, first of all, Iran says that it's been striking these Kurdish militant bases to stop an attack before it even began. But what do we actually know about whether Kurdish groups are preparing a cross-border operation into Iran? Because, you know, we have sources saying that these attacks have essentially already launched.
Well, thank you, Natasha. We know that from news leaks and articles that President Trump spoke to President Masoud Barzani, the head of the Iraqi Kurdish KDP, and Bafil Talabani, the head of the Iraqi Kurdish PUK. And he basically, according to what I heard and the leaks I heard, nothing official from the Kurdish government, that President Trump has said there's no more neutrality. You have to take to be on our side. Well, we know the Kurds on the side of the United States. However, what I heard that President Masoud Barzani, naturally asked for confirmations to protect the Kurdish people, because there has been incidents in the past where the United States let down the Kurds and let them be threw them under the bus. President Biden did that to the Kurds and basically almost gave the Iranians the green light to remove all Iranian Kurdish opposition offices and camps from Iraqi Kurdistan. So also I heard that he was harsher on Bafil Talabani, because we know that Bafil Talabani, and that's not a secret, he has strong relations with the IRGC. He has strong relations with Iraqi militias, proxies of Iran, and even partnership. So this is a very, very critical moment. If I was the United States, I would establish Kurdish Iranian camps on the border inside Iraqi Kurdistan as their safe haven, provide them with air power to protect them. We did that in Kurdistan, Iraq, in the liberation of Iraq in 2003. And also put President Masoud Barzani at the center of the coordination of this issue, but solid and clear assurances to protect the Kurds has been given. And I even heard that President Masoud Barzani asked for these assurances to be in writing. So I don't know how much credible this information that I heard, but it's natural that the Kurds, they're not going to jump in the fire, and they're ready to. They are very brave. They are staunch allies with the United States, but they also share about 1,000 kilometers of borders with Iran. And if the United States let them down the road, they will be crushed by the Iranian mullahs, unfortunately.
Right. You know, obviously, there's just so much to discuss when it comes to the Kurds and past, you could say, relationships that they've had with the United States. Obviously, we've seen what's been taking place in Syria right now. The SDF forces, which were responsible for cracking down on ISIS, largely saying they've lost American support now that Trump has kind of cozied up to al-Shara, who took over the government there. So clearly, Kurdish militias would need some type of assurances from the American government if they were to actually take this on. But beyond that, obviously, the Islamic regime has been pushing this kind of argument that this will fuel separatist movements. What does the Iranian diaspora ultimately think about the idea of the Kurdish militias getting involved in this? And, a final aspect that I just want to add to this, I know this is a long question. There have been comparisons to what took place in Iraq when it comes to the regime, more specifically, and the failure to really lead to a positive transition for the Iraqis. Could the same thing happen in Iran with Kurdish fighters?
The Kurds are very brave fighters, needless to say. But also we have to be very careful. Not all Kurds are equal. Like the PJAK, they are under sanctions. They are offshoot of the PKK. You don't want to deal with them and upset Turkey. We need Turkey on our side this time. And Turkey has been hit by at least one missile from Iran yesterday and was downed. So we don't want to get Turkey involved in this issue in a negative way. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, we have to be very careful to protect the Kurds in Iraq, as I said, and make sure they will have enough immunity from Iranian future attacks. And I'm also disappointed, to be very honest with you, with the Pahlavi, the Shah people, who are ignoring to mention the Kurdish issue. I even approached some of his followers in Washington, and I felt there's some sort of a Persian chauvinistic sentiments amongst them. They want to deny there are Kurds or the Kurdish people. They talk about the broken record of Iranian unity. Well, the Kurds are very central in the liberation of Iran. Trust me, without the Kurds, Pahlavi, we have no chance to succeed. Look, overthrowing a government does not happen by demonstrations of young people. The government of Iran is killing them by the thousands, as you know. And unfortunately, we haven't seen any demonstrations like the one in Gaza in Europe, because as if the Iranian people are not worthy, which unfortunately they are the best people. And so it is important to put the Kurds at the center of this issue, and also all other minorities in Iran. The Arabs, the Baluch, the Azaris, they were all oppressed by Khamenei, and they were also oppressed by the current Shah's father, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And the Kurds have tasted the bitter betrayal by the Shah in 1975, and also another bitter execution and obliteration of the Mahabad Republic in 1946. Right. So I think it's the time for Pahlavi now to bring all the people together. And the Kurds are boots on the ground. You need boots on the ground to overthrow a government. You need a tank to enter the palace to overthrow the government. Without that, students and demonstrations not going to overthrow the government of Iran. And we all want to see this government go away. But without the Kurds, I think that would be an impossible task.
All right. Well, fascinating to have you join us. Thank you so much, Intifada, for your insight. We are turning to our final story before we go out to a quick commercial break. The Islamic Republic of Iran is now targeting yet another country. Azerbaijan is now warning it could retaliate against Iran after 2 drones crossed the border and struck the country's western enclave of Nakhchivan, hitting the terminal building at the international airport there and landing near a school in a nearby village. Officials say the blasts wounded 2 civilians and caused damage at the airport. I want to turn now to our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman. What is going on here? Iran is now basically denying that they had any involvement in this. What do we know about what Azerbaijan is saying in response?
Right. Iran blaming Israel for this, Natasha, as if Israel has any reason to be sending a drone, thousands of kilometers away to Azerbaijan, a country that we have such friendly relations with. By the way, speculation about why Iran may have done this. Some speculating that this is to shut down the airspace of Azerbaijan in order to shut down the only air corridor between Russia and Iran, meaning that many airlines are not flying through Russian territory, not flying through Iranian territory for obvious reasons. And this would cut off all east-west traffic, giving Iran leverage. But anyway, just to go back over the basic facts, the Azeri Ministry of Defense saying that the airport was hit by a drone and that an area near a school was hit by a drone. This is in an enclave of Azerbaijan, Natasha, that's separate from the rest of the country. So surrounded by Armenia, Turkey, and with a small border with Iran. So one would imagine the airport there would be an important means of transportation. More broadly, these are 2 countries that have full bellies for each other, if you will. Azerbaijan having open and by all accounts, not so open, but close relationships with Israel, focused on the Iranian issue. The Iranians obviously not happy about that. And so there is a lot of rationale in general for the two countries to have tension between them. But Azerbaijan hasn't participated in the war, hasn't allowed its territory to be used for the war. And President Ilham Aliyev even said that earlier today, before the drone attack, this is incredible, Natasha, Iran actually contacted them to help evacuate Iranian diplomats in Beirut, and Azerbaijan was going to do it at its own expense, only to get hit by this drone a little bit later. At any rate, unlike some of the countries in the Gulf, Azeri President Ilham Aliyev, for his part, is not mincing words. He has instructed the army to get retaliation plans ready and seems intent on using them.
All right. Well, we're going to see if Azerbaijan may become the first other country to get involved militarily in the ongoing U.S.-Israeli strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran, because as we discussed earlier, Iran has already attacked 11 different countries, including Cyprus, Turkey, 8 Gulf nations, now Azerbaijan. There's a lot of anger regionally. We're going to be going out for a quick commercial break, but don't go anywhere, because we're going to be back shortly with continued rolling coverage of the latest information surrounding the ongoing war between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel and the United States. I'm Natasha Kirchak. This is I-24 News. We'll see you shortly.
Are high interest rates keeping you from selling your home? We have a way to get you more money for your home while saving thousands in commissions. At Ideal Agent, we'll connect you with a top local agent who will sell your home fast, for top dollar, and all this for as low as a 2% commission.
We paid a 2% commission, which I don't think we would have had with any other agent, and we got top dollar for our house, and we are just so happy about it, and the results were fantastic.
Ideal Agent connected me with the top 1% agent in my market, and I actually got it at a discount, and I saved about $12,500, which is unheard of when you're working with the top producer in any industry.
We've helped tens of thousands of home sellers get 5-star results with top performing experts you can trust. We guarantee it. Ideal Agent is available nationwide, there's no obligation, and best of all, our service is completely free. Call today or visit idealagent.com.
Call 800-919-8734.
Do you suffer in pain? Are you stiff, tense, or less active than before? Introducing the EasyWell Remedy Massage System that combines the incredible effects of vibrational therapy, targeted deep tissue shiatsu massage, plus soothing infrared heat. A triple fusion of therapeutic experiences. Full body vibrational therapy increases blood circulation and reduces inflammation. Look at these beads moving from the powerful vibrational motors.
It's like 1,000 little fingers just vibrating my body from head to toe.
Infrared heat penetrates deep to reduce pain, soothe, and relax.
Remedy gets in there and helps deal with the source of the pain, so you feel much better.
The Ultra Shiatsu pillow with 6 infrared heated nodes mimics a professional massage. Plus, it's detachable for deep relief anywhere you need it.
It's just something that you're gonna have to feel for yourself.
Experience the true remedy for your pain and stiffness. Call now.
Wherever you are, access our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert analysis anytime, anywhere, right from your phone. All the content from the i24 News website, the latest articles, exclusive interviews, VOD and live broadcasts is now just a tap away on the i24 News app. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
And we are back on I-24 News. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for sticking with us. This is just in. U.S. President Donald Trump has reportedly demanded that Israeli President Isaac Herzog immediately pardon the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. We are getting this information from Israeli news reports, essentially saying in a phone interview that Trump told Herzog he must give Netanyahu a pardon by today. Trump says that he doesn't want Netanyahu to be bothered by any issue other than the war with Iran, reportedly. But of course, we're going to have to turn to our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman, for more on this. Really fascinated to hear what your thoughts are on this. And is this true?
Listen, it was an interview with Barak Ravid from Israel's Channel 12, and Donald Trump made the comments about Israeli President Isaac Herzog and the need to give Prime Minister Netanyahu a pardon. Again, just to set the groundwork, Netanyahu, of course, on trial in a number of corruption cases and has floated and then officially asked for a pardon from Israeli President Isaac Herzog. And as in the United States, Herzog is the one who decides on whether to give pardons. But, Natasha, the Israeli Justice Ministry and the president's residence usually have a process for giving the pardons, as happens in the United States, too, where it goes through a number of approvals and a number of stages and only then gets to the president's desk with a recommendation. And that's what Herzog has said time and time again. He said, I am going through the full process. I'm waiting for everyone to sign off on this, or at least to give their opinion. And once I have that full file before me, that's when I will make the final decision based on those recommendations. Trump, of course, saying, give it to him today, meaning short circuit the process. I have to say, I agree with the commentary from Daphne Liel, the political correspondent at Channel 12, reacting to this. As she said, this is not likely to influence Isaac Herzog and his decision of giving the pardon. Herzog is term limited to 1 7-year term. He doesn't have any real incentive personally in needing to do this. He needs to protect his legacy, and his legacy includes those who support Netanyahu and those who don't, and continuing to have the statesman-like nature of the president's office. On the other hand, what this does do is it does help Benjamin Netanyahu make the case against the Israeli establishment and the Israeli legal system for his election campaign. So Trump may know, and Netanyahu, for that matter, might know that this won't actually help him get the pardon, but it could help him make his case in an election campaign.
Well, we know
which, of course, is coming up here in Israel by the end of October.
That's true. Well, Trump has been calling for Netanyahu to be pardoned since June of 2025. So that means it's been less than 1 year. He doesn't seem to be giving up on this. The question, of course, is how the Israeli president ultimately responds to this. We're going to have to wait and see.
We'll wait and see, but we've seen how Isaac Herzog has responded in the past, including when Trump said this as part of his appearance at the Israeli Knesset last October. It stands to reason Herzog will come back with the same, as he's always said, I'm following the process. Once this goes through that full process, that's when I'll make a decision.
Herzog is about to also step down from his position, right? Elections are also for the president.
That's right. Well, not during the Israeli election campaign. The president's elected by the Israeli Knesset, I believe, in 2027. But he's term limited, so he is not up for any kind of election. He is at the end of his political career. Of course, there's a long political career in Israel. His interest here, Natasha, I think, will be, knowing his personality and his persona, is going to be to protect his legacy and continue to try to be a consensus figure to Israel and to protect the nature of Israel's president's residence as being above politics.
Well, of course, it's going to be interesting to see how...
Which is not, by the way, mean he won't give the pardon in the end.
For sure.
But if he does give the pardon, he'll want that file before him with people inside the system who have signed off on it, so he can say, it's not me, it's them.
It's just ultimately going to be very interesting to see how this war ends up changing polls overall. And, you know, if in fact it does give Netanyahu a boost, that may be all the more reason for Herzog to follow through with that pardon. But
We have a lot to cover. I'm going to say 30 seconds.
Yes.
You're right. On the other hand, this is a reminder, Natasha, about how little has changed in Israeli politics since October 7th. We're in the middle of maybe the most consequential war in this country's history, and yet we're talking about this. When it comes to election time, these are still going to be the issues that mobilize Israelis politically.
All right. Well, we are going to be turning to our next topic right now. Owen, thank you for that breakdown. As this war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran deepens, one of the world's biggest powers is watching. And so far, they're choosing diplomacy over confrontation. China has strongly condemned these strikes on Iran as violations of international law and sovereignty. But beyond words and diplomatic protests, Beijing hasn't launched any military response, not after Tehran's supreme leader was killed in a joint U.S.-Israel strike, nor after Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, another ally close to Beijing, was captured by U.S. forces. Instead, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that China will send a special envoy to the Middle East to help mediate and push for talks, even as conflict continues to spread across the region. Beijing is urging all sides to protect civilians, refrain from hitting energy infrastructure, keep shipping routes safe, but has stopped short of direct action or sanctions. So the big question, of course, remains about whether China's restraint is strategic patience or a sign that Beijing is just not willing to risk a confrontation with Washington, even for its partners. Joining us now is Asaf Orion. He's director of the Laser Center for Israel-China Policy at INSS. How is China being impacted by the U.S.'s war on Iran and military intervention in Venezuela? Break down what this means geopolitically.
Good evening. First, we need to look at the interests of China in the Middle East, and that's energy security, projects, investments, the relations with the various countries, both Iran and the countries that Iran is showering with missiles, and the safety of China's citizens in the Middle East. That's a basic, I would say, basket of China's interest in the Middle East. At the same time, it's looking through the lens of the great power competition and how the U.S.-China relations develop. And China is looking forward for the visit of President Trump in Beijing, March 31st and the beginning of April. So basically, these are the interests. To your opening remarks, China was not and is not an ally of Iran nor Venezuela, because China has no allies. It has partners of different natures. It does not, as a general policy, intervene in conflicts. It doesn't commit to provide common, security goods and international common goods in the Gulf or in the Middle East or elsewhere. Yes, it has a task force, a counter-piracy task force in the Arabian Sea and near the Horn of Africa, but it doesn't intervene, and it has no serious and effective tools to actually influence the war. Right. So what we see it doing is performative and declarative diplomacy, calling to stop the fighting, calling to settle the conflict through dialogue. And this is exactly what it did with the war in Gaza and the recent conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and now around the Iran war.
I have to ask, what message does this ultimately send to other countries that view China as an alternative to the United States? Does Beijing's restraint ultimately undermine its image as a reliable strategic partner?
Very few Middle Eastern or other countries see China as a real alternative to the U.S. or a security guarantor. China is a very desired economic partner, diplomatic partner and counterpart, and never a geostrategic guarantor, and never a security provider. So it's not a big surprise for any of the Middle Eastern countries that China did not step in to try to sway America or Israel from their course. It complains, it protests, but it's not a big surprise. And I don't think that anyone looks at China as an alternative to the U.S. in the strategic sense of national security and security provisions.
All right. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Asaf. Just want to turn quickly now to our senior diplomatic correspondent, Owen Alterman. I'm interested to hear what your take is in terms of what, the ultimate messaging is to the world, that China isn't really getting involved and making much of a scene other than just rhetoric when it comes to American actions, not only in Iran, but also in Venezuela.
I love how Asaf used the word performative diplomacy. Natasha, what the Chinese are doing is that it always can help them in terms of expanding their soft power and their reach in countries where in competition with the United States. Take Africa, for example, to be in favor of peace and be in favor of negotiations, especially as people who don't have a direct stake in this conflict, either emotionally or physically. That's probably what they want to see. But obviously the stakes for China are very, very high. Stakes for all of Asia are very, very high, from India through China, through Japan and South Korea. We've all been watching the stock markets there. And of course, the price of oil. These are huge oil importing countries. And as Asaf said, they need the oil from the Middle East. As another China scholar once put it to me, China is a whale. It needs to eat. And that's how the Chinese approach the Middle East. Look, on the one hand, the Chinese have to be worried about the price of oil, worried about the economic impact, worried about the prospect of them being able or not being able to buy Iranian oil as they've done in the past. On the other hand, they also have to be scared of watching how the United States is able to operate militarily in Iran, just as it did in Russia. But of course, the Chinese can try to look for openings, as they are with the performative diplomacy, to try to find groups that are hurt by this war in one way or another and try to make some inroads.
All right, Owen, we're going to be turning now to our correspondent, Joe Brown, who is live from Tel Aviv right now. Just a quick update before we do that. The IDF has issued an urgent warning to Iranians in industrial zones in Tehran ahead of planned airstrikes. Basically, they say that in the coming hours, the IDF is going to be operating in the industrial area of Abbas Abad and also the Shenzar industrial area to strike military infrastructure of the regime. There have been many statements like this, evacuation orders, basically, that have been sent to the Iranian public prior to strikes in Tehran. Now, the Israeli Home Front Command is easing restrictions here in Israel today amid what appears to be a slowdown in ballistic missile fire from Iran. And Joe, I want to turn to you now in Tel Aviv. What is the latest on the restrictions? What do we know about missile impacts today as well, if there have been any direct impacts or damages or casualties?
Well, let's start off by talking about the missile strikes that have been aimed towards Israel today. So far, there have been a handful of sirens early in the morning. The most recent one was around about 2 hours ago. In all cases, there have not been any major impacts. There have been a couple of injuries with people trying to get to the shelters. And Magen David Adom has said that they've been treating some people who have been suffering from anxiety attacks. But all in all, there hasn't been anything of note, and this has been the case for the last 2 days. The last time that there has been any building with enough damage that's actually noteworthy was 2 days ago in central Israel, in Bnei Brak and the surrounding areas. And no news is good news. And that is why the IDF has eased the Home Front Command restrictions, as you just said. Maximum of 50 people are now allowed in one place, and workplaces have been opened. Both of those are conditional, though, as long as there is a shelter nearby that people are able to go to if the sirens do sound. However, educational activities are still prohibited. This includes schools and universities. They are going to be checking the Home Front Command restrictions again tomorrow, Friday the 7th, and they will be deciding whether to ease them further or to restrict them again. And based on the way that things are going, there have been much fewer missiles directed towards Israel. It's likely that it will be moving towards the easing of restrictions further. And you may have seen throughout social media, there are tons of videos of Tel Aviv supposedly getting bombed. I'm in Tel Aviv right now. I've been in and around Tel Aviv for the last couple of days. I can tell you that is absolute nonsense. Everything here is intact. The people are out in the streets. Cafes have started to open with the easing of the restrictions. People are feeling a lot more confident to go out. People are feeling a lot more confident, in fact, to go out and film some of the rockets. This is definitely not recommended because all it takes is one that goes through the Israeli air defense system. There's a 3% fail rate for these missiles landing in Israel. So that is not recommended by the Home Front Command and by me as well. I would thoroughly recommend against doing that. So all in all, restrictions are easing. Israel is starting to return to some form of normalcy right now. But as long as there are still sirens, as long as there are still missiles, we will not get that full normalcy just yet.
Yeah, well, I have to say, Joe, we got warnings like this from doctors earlier in the week. What we've seen in past conflicts, like the 12-day war with Iran in June, was complacency after a certain amount of time. People get used to the missile fire, and then they end up going out even during sirens instead of actually going into shelters. And that is the most dangerous thing to do, not only for, obviously, your personal safety, but for the healthcare system here, which is already inundated. Like they said, they've treated over 1,400 Israelis since the start of the conflict. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching in Israel, don't get complacent. Keep on going into the bomb shelters when you hear sirens. All right, we have a quick update before we turn to our next story. U.S. President Donald Trump says that he needs to be personally involved in selecting Iran's next leader, just as he was in Venezuela. This is just out. He told Axios in a phone interview that basically the Iranians are wasting their time over the idea of choosing Khamenei's son as the successor following his assassination. He's calling him a lightweight. That was the terminology. And he says that he needs to be involved in the appointment. Very interesting, of course, especially. I see, Owen, you're nodding. I know you probably want to say something about this. He also said, by the way, just a couple of days ago, I think it was on Tuesday, that Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, who is largely supported by diaspora Iranians, is not necessarily who he thinks needs to take over the country. But we're going to turn to our next story right now. Israel's focus has been squarely on Iran, but life in Gaza is quietly shifting under the radar. Hamas is steadily tightening its grip, setting up new checkpoints, reestablishing government functions, and asserting control over daily life in the Strip, according to reports. At the same time, the group's longstanding ties to Tehran appear to be frayed as Iran's Revolutionary Guard has reportedly cut communications with Hamas and Islamic Jihad since the start of the war. Residents describe a city under stricter supervision, with Hamas consolidating power while the wider region watches the U.S.-Israel strikes unfold. And joining us now is Samer Sidi Jlawi. He is a Fatah activist and the chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund. What does the recent reassertion of Hamas control in Gaza mean for residents' daily lives and governance under the ceasefire? And from those you've been in contact with, is this really the reality of what is happening on the ground right now?
Well, let me first of all link this to the general situation in the Middle East, the war. From the surface, this war could be seen as a war of Iran versus Israel or United States. But in reality, in depth, this is a war over the future of the Middle East. It's a war of terror and ideology that is represented by Iran versus moderation in the Middle East. And that's why you see, for example, countries that, like United Arab Emirates, who have been hit like 7 times more drones and missiles than Israel. So moderation is the source of fear for the Iranian regime. It's the threat for the Iranian regime, and that's the war that is surrounding Gaza. Now, unfortunately, yes, the attention of the whole world has diverted to Iran. Basically, also the American administration and the team that has been following the President Trump peace plan in Gaza, and this has given extra time for Hamas. Now everything is frozen in Gaza. We have seen that even the humanitarian aid was not been possible in the recent days. The decisions of the Board of Peace after its meeting in Washington, D.C. Also have not been followed in implementation. So Hamas is using this extra time and trying, to rebuild its sources. I think we should be the way that we are giving attention to what's happening in Iran is important. But since this is a comprehensive war of moderation versus ideology and terror in the Middle East, we should not divert our eyes from Gaza. The President Trump plan, and I think he is a leader that he proved that he delivers. The way that he support the operation and he mobilized the forces to prepare for the war in Iran shows that he is a responsible leader, that it matters to him what is happening in the Middle East. So we should parallelly follow up his plan in details and allow it. We should all cooperate together into also allowing this plan, which is the way we can end a regime of one of the most important proxies of Hamas. Even though Hamas is a Sunni Islamic movement, it's not a Shia Islamic movement. It was not created by Iran, but it was linked to Iran. It is dependent on Iran. It is working for Iran. So we should, part of this war, we should focus into moving the implementation of President Trump's plan in Gaza by opening more the borders, facilitating the entrance of the Gaza Committee. Gaza Committee is a very important element. Once this committee enters to Gaza, this will mean that officially the death certificate has been issued for the Hamas regime in Gaza. With this committee still in Cairo, we are giving more and more time to Hamas to remobilize, to strengthen itself. So we need to work in the same direction on the front with the Iranians and also in the implementation of President Trump's plan in Gaza.
Absolutely. It's obviously a very difficult situation that we're looking at right now. The United States is wholly focused on Iran at this point. And, the question is, how long is it going to take until Hamas is essentially reestablished enough for it to be a real hampering of the situation of these plans to implement this force of peace and, of course, the stabilization force. We're already seeing Indonesia, for one, say that for now they're not sending troops because the port of peace talks aren't even happening.
Well, I think Hamas has been, since the declaration announcement of the ceasefire in the ICU, and what's giving it more lifetime is that there is still a vacuum. The ISF is not ready to enter. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza is not ready yet to enter. So it's in our hands. Basically, these kind of delays are giving Hamas more time. Mm-hmm. So it's in our hands. We should push things. It could end tomorrow if the committee and the ISF enters to Gaza. Hamas does not, the Hamas that was on the 7th of October is not the same Hamas that exists now in Gaza. Its regime has been totally destroyed. Its military power has been severely destroyed. Right. It is some kind of small militia that is existing just because of a vacuum. And filling the vacuum is the correct answer. So I don't think that it is something in the hands of Hamas. I don't think that Hamas is really something that worries me. What worries me is the lack of attention and the lack of political will now to focus on Gaza parallel to what's happening with the war in Iran.
All right, Samit, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. It's important to note that while all of this is happening, Iran has been continuing to target 8 different Gulf Arab states with drone and missile strikes. The Iranian military says it's just launched a drone attack against a U.S. military site in Kuwait. Bahrain says there is now a fire at Bapco Energy's refinery after an Iranian missile strike. But, of course, that place has now been contained. And this comes just a day after an 11-year-old girl was killed by shrapnel in Kuwait as well. Earlier today, we also saw 6 foreigners injured by debris from an intercepted Iranian drone in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Owen, the UAE specifically has been getting, you could say, the brunt of missile and drone fire from Iran as compared to the other Gulf countries that Iran has been attacking. Why is that the case?
I think there are two theories, Natasha. One is that the UAE arguably has the closest cooperation with the United States, although certainly other countries in the region have very close cooperation with the United States. And the UAE, of course, has the best relationship or most extensive relationship with Israel of any country in the Gulf. The other theory, and the UAE political analyst wrote to this, and I thought it was an interesting argument and a potentially compelling one, is that this isn't an attack on the UAE that's targeted at specific targets.
Mm-hmm.
It's targeted at the UAE system and what the UAE represents, a successful model of modernization and in many ways liberalization just across the Strait of Hormuz and across the Persian Gulf or Arabian Gulf from Iran. And so by targeting the UAE, you not only hit specific targets and hit at the strategic cooperation between the UAE and the United States, and for that matter, Israel, but you also take aim at the system and send the message that the system of modernization and liberalization that's an alternative to what the Iranian regime has represented, that kind of system is just doomed to fail in the Middle East because it can literally come under attack.